They didn't expect you to disappear. Not in silence. Not like this. Not without warning, rage, or final words. They expected the old version, the one who explained, waited, forgave. The one who stayed too long in conversations that drained. The one who mistook emotional labor for connection. They knew how to argue with that one, manipulate that one, break that one. But this version is a mirror they can't touch. Because when you stopped reacting, something changed. You didn't become cold, you became sovereign. And that is the one thing they never accounted for, a version of you that no longer needs to win, prove, or explain. A version that understood the game, smiled once, and walked off the board. They think silence is weak, but only because yours isn't passive. It's precise. The kind of silence that sharpens edges, reclaims time, and forces reflection, not in you, in them. And you know this now. They didn't regret hurting you because it hurt you. They regretted it because you didn't collapse, because you didn't beg, because you disappeared without leaving evidence. There's something terrifying about someone who has nothing left to say. It's the ultimate reversal, and it begins not with revenge, but with restraint. They won when you cared what they thought. That was the leash. Not the insults, not the lies, not even the betrayal. It was your attention, your reactions, your need to be understood. That's what kept you in orbit, burning yourself out for a sun that never gave back. They don't miss you. They miss the control, the performance, the gravity you gave their nonsense by dignifying it with a response. Because the truth is brutal. They never saw you as an equal, only as a mirror. And the moment that mirror stopped flattering them, they shattered it. And now? Now they wonder where you went. They scroll, they lurk, they invent stories in their heads. Not out of love, out of confusion, out of the unbearable question. Why aren't they chasing me? They won't say it, but they'll feel it. Every time your name comes up, every time your absence enters the room like a question no one wants to answer. Because here's the move Machiavelli understood that most never learn. Power is never taken, it's surrendered. They didn't steal your time, you gave it. They didn't manipulate you, you volunteered, and now you revoke. Not with anger, with elegance. The kind that stings in private, the kind that doesn't post, doesn't explain, just levels up in silence until presence becomes a punishment. Not because you tried to be better, but because they stopped existing in your world, and that is when the regret begins. There's a moment they all remember long after you've left. Not the fights, not the break, not even the last words. It's the silence that followed, the way you didn't come back, the way you made peace with never being understood, the way you became untouchable without becoming cruel. That's what echoes, that's what haunts. Because people like them don't process loss like you did. You felt it, Saturday with it. Let it change you. They don't feel loss. They feel the absence of leverage. They test boundaries, not because they want closeness, but because they want control. They want to see if they still matter. So they poke, they bait, they pretend to care. Not because they miss you, but because your silence disturbs their image of themselves. And when you don't play, when you don't bite, it forces the mask to crack, forces the ego to face the truth. They no longer have access, not to your time, not to your energy, not to your mind. Because here's the shift they never expected. You no longer care what their opinion costs. You've outgrown the courtroom in your head where they were once the judge. Now you're the architect, and they're the ghost. Every time they try to haunt the halls they used to own, they realize the locks have changed, the rooms have moved. The version of you they hurt is gone, and the one who replaced them has no appetite for war. Because you learned the final move. When they seek a reaction, give them absence. When they seek closure, give them distance. And when they seek power, remind them they're irrelevant. They'll tell themselves stories. That you're bitter, that you changed, that you think you're better now. But the truth isn't that you changed, it's that you stopped performing. You stopped showing up in roles they wrote for you. You stopped dimming your awareness to protect their comfort. You stopped negotiating your worth like it was up for discussion. And they can't stand that. Because people like them, they don't need love. They need superiority. That's why they only respected you when you doubted yourself. That's why they called you too much the moment you asked for reciprocity. That's why they labeled you cold the second you stopped bleeding on command. It was never about what you said. It was that you stopped needing their permission to say it. That's the paradox. You were never too emotional. You were just inconvenient to manipulate. And now they feel the weight of your absence like debt. They owe you apologies they'll never say out loud. Not because they're ashamed, but because apologies would confirm what they tried to deny. That they lost someone irreplaceable. They'll try to reframe it, blame you, minimize it. But the quiet truth will cut through every excuse. You were solid. They were opportunistic. You were consistent. They were performative. You showed loyalty. They played roles. And eventually you learned, don't expose snakes, starve them. Don't retaliate, evolve. Don't beg to be seen. Become unforgettable. Because that's the real revenge, not success, not glow-ups, not karma. Just clarity. Cold. Final. Undeniable. You don't need them to suffer. That's the difference now. Old, you needed justice. Closure. Proof that they felt what you felt. Proof that the pain meant something. But now you understand. Some people don't need to lose you loudly. They need to lose you completely. No performance, no declaration. Just a clean exit like a switch flipped in your soul and never turned back on. And here's what they never tell you. The final move isn't rage, it's indifference. Indifference isn't the absence of care. It's the refusal to give power. It's the moment you stop waiting to be chosen. The moment you realize their chaos was never personal, just practiced. They weren't confused. They were consistent. You were just too loyal to accept it. And when that loyalty died, so did their script. Now they're left talking to a wall that used to be a mirror. And the scariest part? You're not angry anymore. You're not sad. You're not broken. You're empty in all the right places. No more explaining your value to people who only listen when you're bleeding. No more checking if they watched your stories, liked your posts, felt your silence. Because now, their attention means less than your peace. You are no longer a page in their story. You're the author of your own. And while they're still chasing applause from hollow crowds, you've moved into a season where solitude is sacred and their access is expired. You never needed closure from them. You needed clarity from yourself. And now you have it. You were never weak for staying. That's the lie they fed you. That patience is weakness. That forgiveness is foolish. That your empathy was some kind of defect. But here's what they feared, and still fear. That one day you'd stop trying to be understood. That one day your kindness would become selective. That one day your energy would go from reactive to reserved. Because once it did, you became dangerous. Not loud, not reckless, but unreachable. You see, people like them depend on access. They need you to be available to argue, to explain, to prove that they still matter. Even your anger was a form of attention. Even your pain fed their relevance. But silence starves them. And when your silence becomes self-respect, that's when they feel it. Not as punishment, as powerlessness. Because you weren't the fragile one. You were the loyal one, the deep one, the one who stayed long after it made sense, not because you were naive, but because you were real. They didn't break you. They revealed you. And what they exposed was them. See, anyone can pretend to care when you're giving, but only the real ones show up when you're quiet, when you're healing, when you're no longer feeding egos just to keep the peace. So don't doubt the silence. Don't second-guess the distance. Don't apologize for becoming untouchable to people who only touched you when it served them. You didn't lose them. You lost the illusion that they ever deserved you. The most brutal part? They didn't even notice what they were losing. They thought you'd always be there orbiting their moods, explaining your worth, translating your intentions into something they could use against you later. They misread your silence as confusion, your patience as weakness, your loyalty as dependency. So they pushed, just to see how far they could go, how much you'd tolerate, how long you'd keep swallowing your own instincts to preserve a connection that only existed on their terms. And when you finally pulled away, they weren't shocked. They were insulted, because people like them don't believe you have the right to leave. Not unless they say so. Not unless they've extracted every ounce of usefulness from your presence. Not unless they've rewritten the narrative to make your exit look like a failure, not a decision. But your silence shattered that narrative. You didn't leave crying. You didn't leave screaming. You just left. And the quiet, the clean, emotionless distance left them with one thing they can't tolerate: the burden of their own reflection. Because now they don't have your empathy to hide behind, your forgiveness to keep pretending, your presence to avoid accountability. Now they sit with it, and they will mask it as apathy, as pride, as moving on. But make no mistake, they feel it. They feel it when their new distractions don't land, when their usual manipulation doesn't hit, when they catch themselves thinking about you in the places they used to ignore you. That's the cost of real presence. You don't have to haunt anyone. You just become impossible to replace. One day, they'll talk about you, not with honesty, not with depth, but with revision. They'll say you changed, that you became cold, that things just fell apart. They'll rewrite the script so they can sleep at night, not because they miss you, but because they can't stand the thought that they had you, and still lost. And when they do, you won't flinch, because by then you'll understand. You never had a communication problem. You had a self-respect problem. You were speaking to people who only listened when your pain benefited them, arguing with people who only valued your presence when it made them feel powerful, waiting for accountability from people who'd rather lose you than face themselves. You're done with that now, because now you don't seek validation. You watch behavior. You don't explain boundaries. You enforce them, and you don't chase apologies. You recognize patterns and respond accordingly. That's the final move. Not revenge, not bitterness, not some public display of evolution. Just the quiet recognition that you are no longer for sale. Your time, your attention, your loyalty, all earned now. Not by charm, not by familiarity, not by history, but by truth, by consistency, by presence. Let them regret. Let them gossip. Let them invent new stories. Because you've already written the final chapter. And in that chapter, you win by walking away. Still, silent, untouched. They'll keep checking. Not your page. Not your life. Your temperature. They want to know if you still care. If the door is cracked. If they still have a seat at your table, even if they burned it down. That's why they resurface with small gestures. Nostalgic messages. Half-hearted apologies wrapped in just wanted to check in. Not because they miss you, but because they miss the version of themselves you used to validate. And when you give them nothing, when your tone is still, detached, unreadable, it collapses something inside them they'll never admit. That your silence isn't emotional, it's strategic. Because people like them don't return to make things right. They return to confirm. They still can. But now you understand the game. You don't let snakes apologize. You let them shed their skin and watch what grows back. You don't let old ghosts haunt new peace. And you don't return to fire just because it flickers softer. You watch the patterns. You survived the storms. You played naive long enough to learn the rules. And now you're a wall they can't climb, a door they can't unlock, a version of you they will never have again, not because you're angry, but because you're done. They didn't lose you when they hurt you. They lost you the second they expected you to stay broken. And when you stopped proving your worth, they started realizing theirs never existed. You were their advantage, and they treated you like an option. Let that sink in, not as pain, but as data. They didn't destroy you, they exposed you. They showed you every room where your standards were silent, every moment where your self-respect was optional, every time you bent, hoping they'd meet you halfway. They never did. Not because they couldn't, because they didn't have to. You taught them what was acceptable by staying after they showed you who they were. And when you finally walked, they felt the shift not in their heart, but in their control. You see, regret doesn't show up when they hurt you. It shows up when it doesn't work anymore. When the emotional supply runs dry. When the same tactics fall flat. And now, they're confused. Because you don't hate them. You don't speak on them. You don't engage. You've become something far more dangerous. Unaffected. That's the part they never expected. They prepared for drama, for closure, for one last chance to play the role of the victim in the story they ruined. But all they got was silence. And that silence, that surgical detachment, it cuts deeper than any words ever could. Because when you stop giving people the chance to mistreat you, they finally feel the weight of how much they depended on your softness to excuse their behavior. That softness is gone now. What remains is surgical, precise, final. They'll try to resurrect you. Not the real you, the old you. The one they could guilt, manipulate, keep uncertain. The one who second-guessed their instincts because the cost of confrontation felt too high. That version of you is their only reference point. It's the only you they know how to play. So they'll test. They'll accidentally text. They'll fish with memories. They'll pretend they've changed. But you won't move. Not because you're spiteful, because you've grown beyond the need to be proven right. They thought they were the storm. But you became the sky. Wide, silent, untouchable. Because when you finally understand your value, you don't need to punish people. You just remove them from your kingdom. Not as revenge as architecture. The walls are higher now. The doors are heavier. The passwords have changed. And here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Most people don't want you healed. They want you predictable. They want the version of you who explains their offenses, who takes the blame just to keep the peace, who sacrifices clarity for closeness even when that closeness is killing them. But that version died, buried in every unanswered message, every quiet boundary, every moment you chose presence over performance. Now you speak less, move differently, observe more, and they feel it. They feel it in the shift of your eyes, in the finality of your no, in the calm precision of your silence. You're not heartless. You're just no longer available for emotional charity. And that is the final lesson. There's no satisfaction in their downfall, because by the time it comes, you won't care. You won't be watching. You won't be stalking their life the way they stalked your silence. You won't be measuring your healing by their collapse. You'll be too far, too focused, too free. That's the tragedy for them, and the triumph for you. They never imagined a version of you that could outgrow the wound, not by healing it, but by becoming so much bigger than the space it once took up. They never imagined that walking away wasn't the end. It was the beginning, because something happens when you stop giving your light to the unworthy. Your vision clears, your world sharpens, and suddenly you see all the doors that were always there locked only by your own obsession with being understood. You don't need to be understood anymore. You need to be undisturbed. And that's what this move gives you. Not dominance, not victory, just distance. And inside that distance power, not the kind you flex, the kind you own, the kind that whispers through your presence, through the rooms you no longer enter, through the arguments you no longer feed, through the masks you stopped wearing, through the fire you didn't run from but walked through, unchanged, unbothered, unclaimed. That's the move they never saw coming. That's the part they'll never recover from. That's the part they'll regret forever.